Well, it's a quiet day here in the big city of Durham, and we're going to wait for hopefully Steve Rao to come in and join us and everything. But definitely a lot of things are going on in the world, and we'll check out and see how those things are going and what else is happening in that regards. And we're going to see who else pops in. Maybe Nick Palveda and others will join, and definitely looking forward to seeing Steve come in the near future to talk about what's happening in his side of the world. I know he's definitely been enjoying some time over there, enjoying the waters and all of that, since he had the time to have a vacation and enjoy some vacation time. As a matter of fact, I was just talking to a friend of mine, and they were saying that that's something that we all need, including business leaders. They said that we need that in order to rejuvenate and all of that, that you need that time to have that rejuvenation time. And I know I need some rejuvenation time every once in a while as well, because sometimes you just need to have that downtime in order to recharge, get back into the world, and get back into things along those lines. So we're going to see how that goes on and see what else is happening in the world and everything. I do see that a number of things are happening around the community, including the U.S. and the EU have agreed to suspend a 17-year feud over aircraft subsidies. So anytime we can end feud, that is a good thing. Of course, folks are still dealing with the virus, and I think that folks are trying to figure out, how to get those that are not vaccinated into the vaccinated population. So there are things going on, like even here in this area, we're having folks that are offering gift cards and like things along those lines. I think there's even like a lottery going on where you may have a chance to win a lot of money if you get the vaccine. So folks are trying a number of tricks and everything to get folks vaccinated that are not already in that category. So we're going to see how that works and what other things people do. Because like I said, I think we're around 50% and all of that. And by the way, one of our big states here, California, reopened on yesterday, and it reopened with a mix of apparently joy, worry, and anger. So definitely, California lifted most of its COVID-19 restrictions and officially reopened yesterday, marking the moment when state-subsidized vacation giveaways and 15 million in vaccine lottery prizes as it emerged from the pandemic, politically divided but economically formidable. One of the last U.S. states to reopen, California had already relaxed many of its health restrictions. Others will be not completely phased out until autumn. Still, the formal unwinding of pandemic rules in America's most populous state is yet another signal of a national turn toward recovery. One out of every 8 Americans lives in California, which generates apparently 14.5% of the nation's gross uh, domestic product. So apparently, Governor Newsom said that there is no American recovery without California's recovery, and definitely we're going to see how this all works out, because there's always the danger of things being like a renewal of the virus or some other strain coming out and causing problems those lines. But right now, we're going to have Shaquille come in and see what he's got going on in his world. I was just telling about some of the things that I had found out about things happening in the nation and all of that. So definitely, I did see that, of course, things are being reopened even in California, our big state here in the United States. So I guess folks are glad to see that happening. And definitely, I know that things are still very much in lockdown in other parts of the world. So, Shaquille, what is your thoughts about the United States and maybe even its biggest state, California, and definitely New York is reopened, and it looks like more and more of our states are reopening. And like I said before, I've always got this fear of the other shoe falling down.
Look, I think with the advent of vaccinations, and with such a big percentage of the population having access to the vaccinations, it's great to see people having them, and for things to open up. I've got a lot of friends, obviously, in California, and some family members that live in California. So it's great for them to messaging me saying, "Hey, we're free. We're gonna, California's opening up." That's really positive. So. Look, I think that's great for America, for Americans to be, free once again. But I think that, as we come out of the pandemic, the decisions made by governors and by governments at the state level are certainly going to play a big role in what happens in future elections. I know that there's a lot of people that are not very happy with Gavin Newsom. I know there's a lot of people that aren't happy. I forget the man's name, but with one of the DAs over there, the DA for LA County. So, I think people are going to be. It's been a difficult year. 2020, I think, was a very difficult year around the world, and especially, I think, in the United States with Black Lives Matter and the death of George Floyd. As well as the pandemic and other social issues. I think that there was just, it was a very tough year, and I think that will have some scars that'll take a little while to heal.
No, I definitely agree with you on that. There's definitely going to be some scars that are going to take some time to heal, and who knows how they'll be doing. How are things going over there in Australia? What's the situation like there in terms of how y'all are opening up and everything? So how are things going in the regards of opening up there? Are y'all opening up the majority of your big cities? Because I know you've got a lot of big cities there like Sydney and Melbourne and a number of others, but I was just wondering how the process is going in that part of the world since you're on the opposite side of the globe.
Well, we never really shut down to any great degree. There were temporary lockdowns and things that have happened in various states, but nothing like what you've experienced in the United States. The hardest thing, I think, for me personally was Western Australia, which is where I'm actually from. They closed their border to the rest of the country. So that prevented me and other people from travelling over to Western Australia. And of course, it made it very difficult for Western Australians to come and visit family members who are on the East Coast. So that was frustrating. I think that lasted a lot longer than people would have liked. Victoria, the state where Melbourne is, have had the most serious issues with COVID, and the majority, 8 out of 9 deaths in this country have occurred in Victoria. So they've obviously had some issues, but for the most part, we've been okay. I don't think we've had it any worse than any other country. So for the most part, we've been all right. I think that the most frustrating thing for Australians at the moment is the very slow rollout of the vaccine. A lot of people would like to travel internationally. A lot of people would like to sort of have be able to resume normal activity. And we're very far behind in the vaccine rollout. So that's been quite disappointing, I think, for a lot of people.
What are some of the other big news items that are coming out of Australia and that whole area? Like I said, I know that unfortunately I don't do enough following of the news out of that area, but what are some of the other things that you're hearing about in that part of the globe? Because I know we oftentimes here in the West get so caught up in what's happening in our own states, in our own cities, that we don't oftentimes pay enough attention to what's going on in other parts of the globe. I know a lot of people were paying attention to what was happening in Israel, but we don't necessarily even pay attention to what's going on in Australia or New Zealand or the places that are all the way on the opposite side.
I think the major story for me today, as somebody who is British as well as being Australian, is that Australia has actually entered into a free trade agreement with the UK. Now, that's the first agreement that's been entered into since the UK left the European Union. So that's going to be very interesting. I think that'll be great for Australia. I think it's going to be fantastic for the United Kingdom. They're offering they're going to be offering work visas for people under the age of 35. I missed out on that one, but that's okay. I'm already British, so that's all right. But I think that's great. Australia had or has one with Canada that allows you to get a work visa into Canada pretty easily if you're coming from Australia. So it's nice to see that happening with the UK, which it's really a step forward for the UK. I think for the people that preferenced leaving, one of the things that they talked about was the ability to enter into free trade agreements with other nations without being beholden to the rules of the EU. So this is the first one they've entered. I think that's really exciting, and I hope that the UK enters into more. They're obviously under Trump was a lot of talk of entering into an agreement with the UK and the United States. How that's going to play out into the future, I'm not sure, but I think that while Biden's there, that's certainly a conversation that they can have.
It sounds like it. And I know here we've been having conversations around trade and also conversations around immigration, and sometimes immigration and trade play into that, play into each other. Because I'm of the opinion that sometimes that we would improve the lives of some of the other countries that we're dealing with, that there might not be as much of a push for folks to come from other parts of the world to here, particularly from our southern borders like Guatemala, Mexico, and places like that. So I was just wondering your thoughts about the whole immigration and trade, and also what you're hearing about that in terms of definitely England, and maybe even in terms of Australia, because I definitely know that that's not just a United States issue, but immigration and its role in trade is a world issue.
Look, South American immigration into the United States is obviously an issue that's unique to the United States, but immigration around the world, I think, faces similar issues, and I think that those issues are predominantly the wealthier, more established countries making it accessible for people from poorer nations to enter and to create a life, without hurting natural allies' ability to come over. So, if I wanted to move to the United States today, coming from two countries which are very close allies of the United States, I would have to go through a certain process, to make sure I get the right visas and to apply for naturalization and that sort of thing. And I think that there's probably some of the frustration that occurs in the United States is that there are people that are coming over the border and being processed immediately, while people who are trying to do the right thing are ending up in the back of a queue, and that queue just gets longer or stagnates, and they're not getting processed at all. So I think that can be harmful. Immigration, I think, is important. I don't think that if, for example, there was freedom of movement between the UK and the United States, I don't think that you would see a whole heap of people from America moving to the UK, or a whole heap of people from the UK moving to America. It would be people who feel there would be some movement, but it would be people who feel as though there's an opportunity that they want to pursue, or there's something that the other country offers that would be easier for them. So that sort of stuff I would like to encourage is people that have similar qualifications and are talented. But we do have to recognise that there are people in poorer countries as well that maybe don't have the opportunity in the first place to get the qualifications they need. But it's a question of how many of those people you can bring in without displacing the poor, if your own country. Australia is faced with a similar thing. We obviously have what is referred to as boat people, people that try to enter our country, generally from Indonesia or some of the neighbouring countries that are close to us, who try to sail into Australian waters illegally and then find themselves, on our land, or people who, again, overstay their visas when they fly in. These are issues that we face as well, and we've had some fairly hard rules on that. So if you come into this country illegally and you're caught, you're often processed offshore in an offshore processing centre. And that can take quite some time before you'll actually be allowed into this country. The idea being that you will have to wait in queue to be processed like anybody else would. So, look, I think these things are delicate. I don't think it's as easy as just saying we should have open borders. I don't think it's as easy as just saying we should clamp down on immigration altogether. I think that the issues are very complex. And there's a lot of different things you have to weigh up.
No, I definitely agree with you. They seem to be very complex and definitely very complicated and all of that. And speaking of complication and complicated issues, one of the other stories that I had seen come across my desk and everything was the one that came off earlier today and everything, which is apparently the Biden administration is aiming to bolster information sharing with technology companies, potentially expanding hiring of intelligence analysts and improve the screening of government employees for ties to domestic terrorism as part of a much anticipated plan expected to be released later today, detailing how the federal government should combat extremism. So definitely we're hearing more and more folks trying to figure out how to deal with extremism, and not just the international extremism, but also the national and domestic extremism as well. So President Biden ordered a review of how federal agencies address domestic extremism soon after coming into office, part of an effort to more aggressively acknowledge a national security threat that has grown since the Capitol riots, which of course we know happened on January 6th. So definitely looks like there are some efforts to try to prevent domestic terrorism, and folks don't even think about the fact that there is a domestic terrorism as well, and that can be a lot of different groups on various sides. Some people might consider Antifa to be a domestic terrorist group, and definitely some of those groups like the Proud Boys would definitely be considered to be that as well. So definitely on both sides, the left and the right. So it'll be interesting to see how they regulate them and things along that line. So the assessment being released on Tuesday lists attacks perpetrated by those across the political spectrum. So like I said, it was definitely looking at those that are across the political spectrum, including the fatal shooting of 5 police officers in Dallas, a shooting at a congressional baseball game in 2017, that shooting of the five police officers was in 2016, and of course the siege of Congress on January 6th. So definitely it looks like they are trying to find a way to deal with this issue. And matter of fact, apparently the strategy was also the latest in a series of assessments issued by Mr. Biden, labeling white supremacists and militia groups as the most lethal threat among domestic extremists. So definitely it'll be interesting to see how this plays out, and who gets labeled extremist and who gets labeled not an extremist. But definitely, I'm glad to see that they are at least addressing it across the political boundaries. But I was just wondering your thoughts about even the fact that domestic violence can exist both here, and I imagine that y'all have to deal with domestic terrorism there as well. And I know that there's been examples of domestic terrorism in places like England, and definitely on some of the African and Asian uh, countries on those areas and everything. But I was just wondering your thoughts about that.
Well, I have to say, with due respect to President Biden, I don't believe, just based on what you've said, I don't believe that this is not going to be a targeted thing. I think that just about everything that happens in America these days ends up becoming a political or a politicized event. I know that he mentioned recently in a speech that the biggest threat facing the United States is white extremism. Mm-hmm. I struggle to believe that that's the case unless America has changed radically since I was there last. I don't believe that the majority of white people in America that voted for the Republicans are believers in extreme viewpoints, unless you think that being a constitutionalist is an extreme viewpoint. I think that they really need to start turning the heat down as far as the political arena is concerned. It doesn't need to be this vicious. And, whether you're a Republican or a Democrat and you're sitting in Washington or in one of the other state capitals, your job is to represent, the people of your constituency. It's not to get into gamemanship. It's not to sort of try and outwit the political system and try to find all these fancy maneuvers. You should be able to sit down and talk to people across the aisle and come to fair, reasonable solutions to issues. And perhaps the ones that you can't agree on can be ones that you continue to debate. But there's sort of stagnation where nothing positive gets done because nobody wants to compromise on anything, and it's an all or nothing kind of situation. I think is very, very harmful. And it's not just something that's happened in the United States. I think it's happened around the world as well. But I think it's something that people get very sick of and very tired of. Sure, there are no doubt there are people who are white extremists or white supremacists in the United States. I think that they have similar groups of different ethnicities that believe their own ethnicity to be a supreme, supreme to other races. We don't need to see that. But, if we talk about the unrest that's occurred over the last year, especially 18 months, especially in the United States, I don't think that, the riots or, many of these other things that we've seen has come about because of extremism. I think it's come about because of poor policing and poor enforcement of law and order. at the end of the day, there are things that you're allowed to do and things that you're not. You are allowed to protest. You are allowed to lobby government and seek redress. I mean, that's a constitutionally protected right that you have, and freedom of assembly and those sorts of things. But, you know, when you're looting shops and all that sort of stuff, that's not you know, peaceful assembly to seek redress of your grievances. That's just looting. And, you know, you hear different people that try to justify it by saying, well, the social contract was broken, or this happened, or that had happened, and so therefore it's okay. But, you know, ultimately, I think that is not something that you want to see. And, you know, you've got to look at what did the world look like before. You know, once upon a time, you didn't have a police department, you didn't have government, you didn't have all of these types of institutions, and so therefore you had lawlessness, you had violence, you had, you know, situations where you had to try and fight to protect what is yours. We had battles and wars and all sorts of things. And, you know, there was an agreement basically amongst people. You know, we institute government, we institute police services to keep everybody safe. We make sure that everybody has equal access to government services and to government in general. Those are all important parts of the foundation of a country. And when things aren't operating the way they should, so if everybody should have equal access to government and people don't, that is something that needs to be corrected. But you don't correct it by destroying the whole process altogether. And I think that's a real problem the United States needs to look at, what, as a country, the United States should be in the future.
No, definitely. I'm hearing what you're saying. And even with in terms of policing and all of that, I do sometimes think that our police get a hard rap and everything. I actually got a cousin that is involved in that whole field and all of that. He's a Georgia Bureau of Investigation officer, and he sometimes talks about the fact that he does feel that they get a hard rap. And actually, yesterday on one of our shows, we had the pleasure of having a young lady on who's a military veteran and a former military police officer. So she was saying the same thing that I know you said, and that other folks have said, which is that there are some bad apples, and that the police force needs to try to find a way to get those bad apples out. And it is not necessarily that the police are an inherently bad organization. Now, there are folks that sometimes talk about defunding the police, and I actually don't think that that's what people are actually saying, is to get rid of all the money to the police. I think that that's like one of the worst terms that ever came up and everything, because I think that it's a misused term, because I think a lot of times what people actually mean, the majority, I'm not saying all, because there are some people that literally might be anarchists and would like to see no police at all. But I think the majority of folks that even use that term are just talking about that they would like to see some of the resources that the police may be getting that are being used to get certain kinds of equipment, and some of that equipment may be high tech and like assault rifles and other things that we don't feel that they are necessarily needed into community policing and into community programs and to other things. So I think that the majority of the folks that are talking about defunding the police are talking about like realigning or reassessing some of the money that is out there and making it more of what used to be called community-based policing. If you remember the old TV show, Andy Griffin, it might be something more along the lines of that and everything. But I don't know whether you agree with me or not about that concept of defunding the police and everything.
If that's what people really mean, then they should just say that, right? Rather than saying we should just defund the police. Look, I'm no fan of police. It's interesting because somebody off the street asked me the other day, said, "Oh, you know, you're such an advocate of police departments." Like I'm absolutely not, and people who know me quite well know that I have quite a disdain for police officers. You know, I don't talk to them generally. I'm not a fan of police as a general rule. But that doesn't mean that I think that they should not exist. We need a police service. My main concern, that's not police everywhere, there are different ones, but my main concern with police departments is that they will often, you know, get somebody who's quite young, who's done something stupid, and they'll get them in court, or they'll get them in an interview, and they'll be like, why don't you take responsibility? Why don't you man up and take responsibility for your actions, right? So they try to, you know, have other people, or they'll say to court, you know, he took no responsibility. This man's, you know, a terrible person. We should lock him up. But when the police do something wrong, there's never any responsibility taken. There's always an use. There's always a police union that will jump up and defend them, and it doesn't matter, it doesn't matter what the scenario is, that they're always there to defend them. Now, I have a lot to say to police unions that do that, because in my view, when you are defending an officer who's clearly done something wrong, and it may not necessarily need to be a career-ending infraction, but they've done something wrong, or they've spoken to a member of the public in a very demeaning way, or they've, or just something really simple that doesn't seem like a big deal. But, I know what it would be like in America. It'd be the same as here. You're driving down the freeway, you're doing the speed limit, and a police car comes flying past you. They've got no lights, no sirens on, because they know that they're not going to get pulled over. But here you are, the lowly citizen, having to abide by the rules. It's annoying to see that. I think it just shows this kind of we can do whatever we like kind of attitude. And I think that for the officers that don't act that way, they get tarred with that same sort of brush. And when a police union then stands up for the officers that are doing the wrong thing, it does a disservice to the officers that are doing the right thing. But the solution isn't either to go and get rid of the police unions. Because police officers need to have a group that can represent them collectively, just like most other organizations need to have a group that will protect them, that will stand up for them, that will represent them. So it's a matter of getting that balance right. Should there be more community policing? Sure. I'm absolutely good with that. I also think that for non-violent offences, and for crimes that, like shoplifting and little, sort of offences like that aren't really, they don't have a victim who's going to have their life destroyed by the act, by the action, for misdemeanors and those types of offences. You can probably deal with those in a better way than the heavy-handed way that police services have to deal with it. It's not their fault that they have to enforce the law. But when somebody gets caught up in the system and they have to go through the judicial process and all that, that can be a very difficult and complex process for them. And I'm sure that there are other ways to divert people's behaviour. The same thing with drug offences. We've seen a lot of places now have diversion courts. So you get caught with some drugs, which is probably just for personal use. They'll divert you out of the criminal justice system into other programs to try and help you. I think that those sorts of programs are really positive. And if what is being advocated by the people that say defund the police is more funding for some of those types of programs that would aim to try and make a difference without criminalising people, hey, I'm right there, I'm all for it. But if what's being advocated is that police should have their resources taken away, that we should let criminals just do whatever they like, people can't defend themselves. We're seeing huge increases in rates of violent crime, and we should all just turn a blind eye to it because racism or something like that. I think that that's not an argument that I'm persuaded by. I don't think that's positive, and I don't think that works. And I also don't think that it actually helps the minorities that people think they're helping. If you come from if you're a poor black person and you come from a poor black area, not having the police constantly breathing down your neck and picking on you for small infractions of the law is a positive thing that you want to have. But not having the police help you when your house has just been broken into and you're terrified and you're cowering in the closet on the phone, not sure who's inside your house, and the police aren't going to respond for 45 minutes, that doesn't help you. And that probably just drives up more violence. We've seen this before, and what ends up happening is you get vigilante groups, and then they turn into gangs, and the cycle kind of repeats. So I think that again, it's a balancing act. I think when you reduce it just to it's racist or it's sexist or it's this or it's that, you don't actually look at any of the real issues that could be affecting things and how best to deal with them.
Yeah, I hear you. And you actually mentioned a couple of things that were interesting me and everything. One was the unions, because definitely I've been sometimes in the past a fan of unions. I've actually got some friends here in this area, and I might try to see if any of them are available in other editions of what we have here on World Edition or on some of our other programs to come on, because because they're actually involved in some of the unions here and everything. So I know my friend Angaza Laughing House and some others are involved in that union process. But I also know that unions have had, both a good history of helping people with wages and employment and all of that, but they've also had some negative history in terms of some of the organizations that they have been tied to, because definitely unions have had some ties, not all unions, but some unions with the mafia and with some other organizations as well. So I guess unions
I
can
was,
have
I was
a
more referring there.
two-edged kind of background.
I was more referring there to police unions. I mean, unions as a general rule, we can we can give criticism to them. We can also give credit to them for things that they've done. It reminds me, I think, of you asked me a couple of times on air, a handful of weeks ago. You asked me again about, I seem a little bit contradictory sometimes because I'm not, people think I'm a right winger, but then I'm not. I'm sort of a liberal libertarian. What the hell do I mean, and that sort of stuff. And I think, obviously I'm more comfortable sitting sort of center right.
Right.
But when you're centre right, you can understand what's going on the centre left. You can relate to it. I can't really relate to the hard left, who are proposing socialism in the way that in the definition of what socialism is. The definition of socialism being that government controls all the means of production. Democratic socialism meaning that you get to vote on how that means of production is used. I don't support that because I don't think that achieves very much. I think that ends up hurting a lot of people, and it doesn't, and it's not necessary in the first place. I think that we should favour individual freedoms and liberty first and foremost. But on the extreme of the right, you start to see, especially when religion gets involved, you start to see people, the Scarlet Letter type situations where people can offend the political right, not by actually breaking the law, but by doing something that they don't agree with. And you start to sort of see, a very much more rigid society full of rules and regulations as well. I think that being somewhere in the centre is about right. But it's interesting because I was having this conversation a couple of days ago with a friend of mine. We don't have any societies that are really, well, no, we do actually. We have a few societies that have really embraced the socialist idea. We don't have any societies that are communist, really. Even China is a bit more of a mixed system these days. So we do have some countries that are socialist, but we don't really have very many that are completely socialist. We also don't have any countries out there that are completely free market, sort of laissez-faire, free market capitalist societies. We don't have that. What we have is a mixed system. Mm-hmm. And in most countries, especially the ones that people will think of as being socialist, like Sweden, which is very far away from being a socialist country, they do have a high level of government services. And I think that's what people are after. I think people are saying we want to have more socialized services or more government funding of services. I don't think they want the whole economy to be socialized. So what countries like Sweden need is they need a strong capitalist economy with socialized services for the people. And I think that's a balance. We have a mixed system. We have a system of some government or some services being provided or funded by government and some things being done by the free market. And that's probably about right. I think that where the arguments or the debates in politics should be is about how much funding there should be for these programs and what that money is actually being spent on, and also how that funding is being raised. Those three issues, I think, are really the only ones that should be, the purview of government. Everything else should be up to society to decide for themselves. And that's why I would agree with things like what Milton Friedman said about the school system. Let parents have the money, right? If you want them to spend the money on education, give them a voucher or give them, some kind of restrictions on how they can spend the money. But instead of having the school curriculum dictated to them by local school boards, why don't you let the parents make decisions for them and their families as to what's best for their children? And I think that that's really the case with most social services that are funded by government, including healthcare, is you don't have to have the doctor employed by the government. You can have the patient's healthcare needs funded either partially or fully by government, but you don't need the government, the doctor, to be a government employee. So you can actually give a lot more choice to the individual person about what their healthcare is going to look like and what it's going to be. So I try to sort of make that differentiation, as I do believe in personal freedom, and I don't think that we should give that up easily. And for those people that think, hey, healthcare is not funded enough, or education's failing us, infrastructure's not funded properly, all those sorts of things, that's fine. Those are good arguments. But I don't think that those are arguments that consists of us saying, well, because those things aren't funded, we therefore need to give our freedom up to government. I just don't think that works.
That makes sense. And I know one of the people that I've been talking to on this program about different things, including critical race theory, was none other than Sasha Starr. And Sasha has joined us and everything. So Sasha has actually joined the conversation and everything. So I've got him popping in. But actually, one of the stories that I had seen was that UNC Chapel Hill, of course, has hired the creator of the 1619 Project to teach journalism. But apparently, one of our local senators, Tom Tillis, is saying that he wants to defund any K-12 school system that uses those series of essays as a teaching material. So he is one of 7 Republican senators to reintroduce their Saving American History Act, which prohibits the use of federal funds to teach the 1619 Project in K through 12 schools. So definitely this is a kind of version that looks at American history and definitely looks at the fact of there was slavery and the fact that there was definitely some things that came out of slavery, including like the Renaissance and a number of other things. So he's trying to apparently do the opposite of what you're talking about, Shaquille, and he's definitely trying to say that definitely there are different interpretations, and therefore we don't need to be teaching that particular interpretation. So the senators that are got this act going have a different interpretation of the project, saying the true date of America's founding is July 4th, 1776, when the Declaration of Independence was adopted, and the 1619 Project is a racially divisive and revisionist account of history that threatens the integrity of the Union by denying the true principles on which it was founded. So they're saying that, wait a minute, 1619 might be a date in history, but it's not when everything else was going on, and that it's part of what me and Sasha and others have talked about, which is critical race theory. And so the 1619 Project has been lumped together with critical race theory as Republican lawmakers object to a new way of teaching American history. So they're feeling that this is a new way of teaching American history. I would argue that it's actually looking at the entirety of American history and not necessarily teaching new American history.
Like if you want to look at the entirety of American history, then you should go back further and talk about, when the Indian tribes were running it, go back further, talk about when the dinosaurs were roaming. I mean, the United States of America as a constitutional republic has been around since the Declaration of Independence, and that's just the way it is. And, again, I would say if people want their children to learn that, let them make that decision. If people don't want their children to learn that, let them make that decision. Okay, I've used this example before, Sasha. I think he's frozen, so I'll just redirect my comments to you. I've used this example before.
Yeah.
If the local school board was to say to me when I was in high school, you have to go and learn gymnastics, okay? Mm-hmm. Like I was never that athletic, and I would have sucked at gymnastics. I would have hated it, and I wouldn't have wanted to do it. But if they said to me, hey, or said to my parents, hey, look, it costs $2,000 a year for a particular extracurricular activity, we suggest that he should learn gymnastics. That's what we think would be good for your son. And one of the other options was chess. I would have benefited a lot more from it, even if I was no good. I know, Sasha, you said to me, you said on air that I was, a pretty aggressive player, and I had some great chess things. Very much appreciate that. But even if I was no good at it, even if I just completely suck at chess, but I enjoyed it, I really enjoyed playing, I'm just not very good at it, that would still be a better use of my time. Because maybe, even though I'm not very good at chess, maybe I'm learning something about geometry, or I'm learning something that just naturally fits with me. So again, I really think that people should, if you think that revisionist history should be taught, Teach it to your kids, but why do you need to force it and impose it on somebody else's children?
But is it really revisionist history if slavery existed and it may be the first slave, and that's what the 1690 Project argues, came onto the shores of the United States in 1619 and everything? So is that really revisionist history? And no, I would have no problem and actually have some of that ancestry in my
I'd
blood.
like to ask
With
you
hold on a
something.
second, I would have no problem with teaching American Indian
Mark,
history and all of that.
Mark, that can be taught, but that was not the foundation of the constitutional republic of the United States. If you want to talk about what happened when the British first got there or when other European nations first got there, that's fine. But look, the Spanish didn't exactly, go into South American countries and just do nothing wrong to those people. Like the British didn't do nothing wrong to the Indians. So it's fine to talk about history. But, this kind of victimhood, oh, Whitey did this, Whitey did that. The reason I get my back up about that is if you look through history, human beings have done horrible, grotesque things to other human beings forever. I mean, look at the Spanish Inquisition. Look at the religious wars throughout Europe in the 1400s, 1500s. You just name the century, and you can talk about all of the horrific things that we've done. The kings in Scotland and queens in Scotland and England and all these different, royal clans and what they did. And people say, well, if you get married, the king gets to be with your virgin wife before you do, because that's just the king's prerogative. All this sort of stuff. We've been horrible and horrific to each other forever. The Romans did all these things. The Greeks did all these things. The idea behind the 1619 Project is not just to teach a history of the United States before the Constitutional Republic came about. It's about trying to reinforce the idea that the United States today owes a debt to people based on the color of their skin. It's a political movement, and it should be called out for what it is.
Well, I don't know that I would agree that it's a political movement. The one thing I would say is that most schools, and I do have some nephews that attend school, definitely teach about Christopher Columbus coming to the country. So if you can teach about Christopher Columbus landing, and by the way, he was lost, then you can also teach about the 1619 Project and when that part of history was going on. So like I said, I would argue that should be part of the school system if you're going to teach about Christopher Columbus. Like if you're going to start in 1776 with the beginning of the Union, then yes, maybe we just start in 1776 with the creation of the Union. But if you're going to teach the rest of the history, and most schools do teach about Christopher Columbus. So if you're going to teach about Christopher Columbus, then yes, you have to teach about 1619 as well.
Mark,
Most schools do teach about
very quick question. Don't forget that I'm in Canada. I'm not so knowledgeable in U.S. history. I know a little bit, but not that much. What's happened in whatever today is U.S. before 1619? Let's see, in 1618. What was there before? What? How would you describe it?
That was when the American Indians were here, and like I said, I would have no problem with it even going back to that if we have some of that history. And I would have no problem with the historians that are aware of that environment doing some studies about the American Indian history and what was going on. It was a series of multiple nations. It was not one nation.
Okay, I'll rephrase my question. You're not answering my question, but I will help you. What's the difference? What's the difference between 1618 and 1619?
1619 was when the first American slaves were supposed to have landed on the United States coast.
Really?
Yes.
Okay, I'll tell you something. I studied a lot Canadian history and Canadian slavery in particular. Before white people ever entered Canada, the slavery was probably the only means of production in whatever today is Canada. And you know who were the slave owners? Ingenious people. They were Canadian slave owners, and they had slaves. And that's how the society was built in Canada. Now, when white people came, there were very few, some French people, some English people, they were horrified. But then they realized that they cannot compete and make any economic headway. Either they have to do one of two things: adopt slavery and become slave owners, or abolish slavery altogether, so they will be on equal footings with ingenious people. Otherwise, they will lose. They will have to leave. Now,
and I have no problem with us teaching that part of history as well. Like I said, I have no problem with us teaching the fact that slavery has existed for a number of years.
Mark, I haven't even not finished. I haven't even started. So if you will take, so if you will take ingenious people, don't forget at that time in 1619 there was no border between U.S. and Canada because there was no Canada, there was no U.S. So no border. Okay, so I can only imagine that in U.S. slavery was just as widely spread as in Canada. And I can bet any money that ingenious people before 1619 were slave owners. The only thing they were enslaving probably their own people. But that's nothing new in that, because in Russia before 1861, there was slavery. And they were enslaving their own people. And it's
I
just a simple
think it's very hard for us to find a society, historically, to find a society that didn't have slavery in some shape or form. Mark, they're talking about Virginia, presumably. They're talking about the first
Virginia, right?
Virginia. I mean, again, this is an ideology because it's referring to the only time when it was bad was when white people did it to black Africans. Right.
Okay.
That was
I'm not arguing that at
Let's talk
all.
about black Africans.
when white people in Europe do it to other white people in Europe. That wasn't, and that was happening at the same time.
First of all, the black Africans, before being shipped to North America,
We're
they
enslaved.
were already enslaved by their own African people. They were slaves right there in Africa. Otherwise, no Portuguese traders could put them on a ship and ship them to North America if they were not slaves already. So the ownership changed from African slave owners to U.S. slave owners. And I'm not even sure that U.S. slave owners, so you're talking about the first white people who came from England to U.S., how enthusiastic they were about that. But once ship came in Virginia, they were very humane people, these Portuguese traders, because they didn't go to Canada because it's too cold. So a lot of the slaves would just die from the cold. So they were very humanistic people. So they went to Virginia, which has much better climate than Canada. Okay, so what's really a substantial evidence from that particular episode in human history for which we should learn? I think that 1619, there is no difference between 1619 or 18 or 17 or whatever. There is just no difference. The slavery was going on in whatever today is US. The slavery was on. It's probably the oldest and perhaps quite successful way of conducting business affairs, because I'll tell you one thing. I think I told in a program that several years ago I had a slave. I was a slave owner for a short period of time, only 1 month. But there was a guy, he owed me money and he couldn't pay, and he said he completely broke, and he offered to be my slave for 1 month. So I accepted. Why not? I didn't know really what make him to do, but he was ready to do anything. He was ready to drive me, to do shopping, to wash the dishes, to just anything. So I used his services a little bit. I was getting bored, actually. He was not a very clever man. And actually, I hated that when he drives, he likes to talk, and he had to talk to me all the time. So I asked him not to drive me anymore. But I had to be very inventive to find for him what to do. It's not easy. It's not easy thing.
I mean, well, like I said, and I see what you're saying, Sasha. Definitely that will be a controversial statement. I'm curious to see what folks are going to say about this when it is in what a friend of mine calls team replay. The fact that Sasha has now said that he used to have a slave for a month and everything, and all along those lines. But I mean, one of the other big issues that goes on in the society, and is actually even going on now. So, like I said, I don't think that the argument is that you should not teach about slavery, and even the history of slavery around the continents, and notice I did say continents, I didn't just say America, because I know that slavery has existed. I mean, shucks, we go back to the Bible, and there was
Okay,
slavery.
you did it right. You just said
So I
it.
know
You
that
have to
slavery
learn
existed.
about
Hold on a second,
slavery
folks.
through the
But I'm
centuries.
saying, but even one of the big issues of today is human trafficking, which is nothing but a modern form of slavery. So I know that that's even a big issue
Let me
that
just jump
exists
in.
even in today's world.
Let me just jump in here though, because there's, you know, we've the argument's kind of taken a different thing. If what we're suggesting is that U.S. children, not other countries' children, because they're okay, right? It's only an American thing. That American children should learn about the history of slavery. Hey, fine, but put that in the history section of their education. Okay, learning about civics, I think, is pretty important. The fact remains that the Constitutional Republic of the United States became that way and was started at the Declaration of Independence, and you know, at 1776, as you said. And I think that yes, it may be fascinating to learn about where we came from in history and what we did to each other over various parts of our history. But the United States stood, at least at that time, as a very unique country, because when it declared its independence from Mother England, it had to come up with a system of governance which was different to what had really been around before. Mm-hmm. It had to have, you know, a democratic process. It had to have checks and balances. The Bill of Rights followed shortly afterwards in order to protect people, individual people, from the overreach of government and all of that sort of stuff. These things are really important, and they form part of human history's most important historical documents, not just for the United States, but because of the influence that had on other countries. You know, almost every country on earth now has a Bill of Rights for its people. You know, these are really important things, and to try to suggest that,
Shaquille, if I can just jump in.
And to try to suggest that American kids shouldn't learn that, and shouldn't learn that that was the foundation of the system of governance and values that America holds dear, because really slaves arrived in 1619. So therefore we should learn that those are the ideals of America. And that's really what's being suggested. That
no,
America,
but I would argue, but can't you put things in context within the Constitution? And this is something that a friend of the family actually mentioned, because he actually put it in his book and everything, and that's Floyd McKissick. Within the Constitution is a phrase called 3/5 of a man, and that is what definitely is what the African American was considered in everything. So
I've got a copy of the Constitution. Tell me where in the Constitution it says anything about 3/5 of a man.
Well, you have to go further back. It may not be quite in the Constitution. Don't have my copy, but I do know. I'm saying I don't have my copy, so I'm not going to argue with it. I'm not going to make a book argument when I don't have the book in front of me. But I do know that it is mentioned within the study of that. So definitely they talk about the fact that it says the freedom of all man, and most teachers that I know throughout the country and everything, because I know teachers in various parts of our country and everything, will tell you that they will teach the fact that it was written by the founding fathers, mostly European Americans. There was no African American among the founding fathers, and it also talks about the fact that the African American was not considered a because that's why they actually add
this argument.
That's actually why they add something in the Constitution, because they add about race in the Constitution.
Shaquille, I think you have older version of Constitution. In the newer version, you would find it.
I'll find it there. Old one. This argument is akin to saying, once upon a time, and you know, really up until relatively recently, women weren't allowed to vote. Okay,
that's also in the Constitution as well.
So we should, well, no, women not being allowed to vote was not written into the Constitution. It just wasn't written that they were. Right. They clarified it later on. But
which is what they do with African Americans.
Again, it's not just an American thing. Women weren't allowed to vote in most parts of the world. So what the argument you're making is that essentially, if I'm understanding you correctly, is that, well, the founding fathers of America and the people that were, you know, the Federalists versus the anti-Federalist people, you know, debaters and all that sort of stuff, all those kinds of people, look, the foundation was rotten because in the 13 original colonies, you know, that they had slaves, these were slave owners, and so therefore, you know, what a terrible thing. This is akin to saying that because it was only men who were ruling in a system where women couldn't vote, right, that those men who actually voted in the idea that women could vote are somehow sexist. That's akin to what you're saying there, right? Like, people make progress over time. So, of course, prior to women being able to vote, only men could vote. And men collectively said women should be able to vote. I mean, there's a sort of circular logic being deployed. Sasha.
Okay.
Yes,
First of all, our mistake here, or three of us, or only two included, or only one, probably excluding Shaquille as well, is that you are going to, or you're trying to judge history, whatever happened 200-300 years ago, 400 years ago, from today's point of view of today's modern men. This is absolutely incorrect, because then you have to go deep into history of ancient Rome and history of medieval Europe, and you will criticize everything, whatever all these kings and emperors and everybody else were doing. But at that time, where they were living, they were doing right and honorable things most of the time, not ever. And so today, it's very easy to criticize, 1619, it was all wrong. By the way, I still believe that 1619 was something that benefited all sides, because the slaves were taken from Africa, where they were probably dying in 2-3 years being in slavery because of the climate, because of the poor food and so on. They were coming to North America with much better climate, better food. They were treated much better than in Africa. The Portuguese traders were making money by taking them and shipping them to North America. So the slave owners were getting reasonably cheap labor, and so they could prosper and have their plantations succeed and so on. That's number one. Give or take. Number two, critical race theory. This is complete garbage, and I'll tell you why. First of all, men and women, by the way, by being born, they are not selecting color of their skin. They are born with, and being whatever they are born, there is no advantage or disadvantage trying to be this or that, except that I remember a very funny movie as a jerk with Steve Martin, when he became rich and famous, and people ask him, so how could you do that? How did it go for you? He said, well, I was born a poor black child. And then slowly things started to improve. So that was really funny. So what I want to say is that you don't select a color of your skin. Number two, today's people cannot be responsible for whatever done their predecessors 300, 400 years ago or so. There's absolutely no responsibility of today's people, even if they did something wrong. Even I can accept that a lot of things in history were wrong, but again, by today's standards, from seeing it from today's perspective. When they were doing that, it was completely different time, different situation, and we cannot even judge it. But 100%. The people of today are not whatsoever responsible for whatever happened with their predecessors 300-400 years ago.
No, I hear what you're saying, Sasha. But first off, I've got to laugh at a couple of things that you said, Sasha. One is that
before you do, sorry, if I can just quickly jump in, I just want to say one thing here. It's not just about the standards of today, though, and I agree with everything you said, Sasha. Except I'll just say this: the 3/5 compromise that you're talking about, Mark, was exactly that. It was a compromise. And it was because the people in the north of America were the northern states of what is now the United States of America, were, for the most part, bitterly opposed to slavery. They thought that freedom and liberty was an integral part of the foundation of the new country. And that was opposed by the southern slave owners. Okay. The 3/5 the 3/5 compromise had a lot to do with taxation and those sorts of things, and it was that the compromise was accepted because of the desire to unionize the country, that being more important than abolishing slavery at that time. Okay, but that's history. Now, as it has come out with the 14th Amendment and many other things that have happened, the Civil War, all these things happened in order for slavery to be abolished as an institution in America. It's important not to, in my opinion, not to go back in history and to blame everybody who existed back then for what in today's terms is a horrible thing, which is slavery. And it's certainly, in my eyes, not an excuse today to go and riot and pillage, okay, and to say that somehow the entirety of the United States of America as a country is founded on evil principles because something existed hundreds of years ago. That's just not correct. Anyway, back to you.
Well, first off, a couple of things that you said, Sasha, I'm gonna have to totally disagree with you on what else is new and everything along those lines, which is the fact that this whole concept of Africa being this dark continent with no history and a history that was like, these savage folks and everything. That's like the Tarzan version of Africa. And Africa has some rich history.
I never said nothing about African history. Not
I don't recall him saying that either.
No, but but you said that they were coming from Africa and that there was much better life that they were getting when they came to America as slaves. You did say
Possibly.
that.
Yes, I do think so, but I don't.
And there was also diseases
necessarily...
that they were introduced to when they came to America, and there were diseases that Europeans brought. That is part of the reason, not all of the reason, but part of the reason that the Native American population was dissipated. So that's my part that I'm having arguments with and everything, because you may not have said it directly, but you did imply it. So I will argue that that was implied, and I cannot let that one slide. I can let a lot of things slide, but I can't let that one slide.
That can be the case all around white Europe. I mean, how many people were displaced over history in Europe by I mean, okay, let's take the whitest places on earth. These were the most bloodthirsty people in history, the Vikings. These are all the people that come from Scandinavia. I mean, how many people did they displace in other European, especially Southern European countries?
No, I'm not arguing that they did not displace that, and I'm not arguing that there was not some negative history in Africa, but there was also some great positive history. There was some great advances in civilization that came out of Africa.
It looks like there is positive history everywhere except for the United States. That's what.
No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying there's positive history that came out of the United States as well.
The kids of America should never know that there was anything positive that happened since the country's founding. That everything in U.S. history was race motivated.
No, I'm not saying that everything was race based, but I'm also saying that at the same time there are things that should be taught, including, if you want to go back to our earlier conversation about the police, because I'm a big fan of the movie that Ava DuVernay did. I think I'm pronouncing that name right. Called 13, which actually explains how the prison system is tied to slavery, and it's still tied to slavery. So she actually explains a lot of that as well. So I'm actually a fan of that movie.
Again, you want to teach all these things. Is there anything positive about America that's going to be taught to American kids?
Oh, no, there's plenty of things that'll be.
I'm not saying that these things don't exist in American history or that they shouldn't be taught. Right. But should anything positive about America be taught to Americans?
I totally agree. No, I totally agree that there are positive things. I'm a big fan of Ben Franklin.
I've told American kids things about America's foundation that they go, oh, and they had no idea, right? And it shouldn't take somebody who doesn't even live there to talk about some of the great things that happened. Australia's got a history that we've had some horrible things happen. We had a thing called the White Australia policy that impacted our Indigenous population terribly, and it still affects that population. Okay, but that doesn't mean all of Australia is terrible. All right, I mean, there's just so much stuff that happens in history, and this revising it in such a way that people, young people who are born are going to grow up thinking that they live in this horrible place with horrible ideals. It's just not the right way to do things. We should try to instill some pride in our future generations.
Oh, and most of the folks I know are very proud of their country, including those that are coming from the what people would call the projects and things of that nature. So, like I said, most of them do know about Benjamin Franklin, but at the same time, they know about George Washington Carver, and they know about a number of other folks that are existing as well. So, I'm not saying that we don't need to teach both the positive and the negatives, because I actually think that both of those need to be taught. And one of the things, and actually we got to get ready to wrap up, that I was going to ask both of you is that I don't know, and I've never been to either of the countries, how much of that population is taught in your respective countries. You just mentioned definitely, Shaquille, about the Aborigine population that exists in Australia, and I don't know how much of that is taught in the Australian school system, and I certainly think that it should be taught in the school system of Australia. The same with Canada. And I've told you before, Sasha, that I've got a cousin that is of Native American heritage, or at least that's the part of our heritage that he claims the most, because, there's mixed heritage in my family. So he claims more of the native side and all of that. But he is definitely married to a native lady from Canada. And I need to ask him and her whether there is a lot of that history taught in Canada, because there is a large native population that existed in Canada as well.
They've recently tried to say that mathematics is racist, and mathematics should be taught in a racially, with special sort of focus on how mathematics affects, race theory, right? Critical race theory. It's nonsense. And what I would suggest is, before you start thinking about what countries around the world should teach their young about the horrible things that have happened throughout their history, perhaps we could start with getting our kids to learn how to, add up, how to spell, how to cook, how to have some life skills, maybe some skills to help them get a job. And then those kids that are interested in history can then maybe focus on history. Those kids that are interested in biology can go and focus on biology. Those kids that are interested in being a scientist can focus on science. Those kids that are more interested in mechanics or something, you can go and get trade school qualifications. Maybe we could focus on that more than trying to instill in our children.
I don't know if you're aware of one thing, that Benjamin Franklin was a very strong chess player. And when he was in France, he was going to Café La Régence, and he was playing with a very strong French maestro.
I did not know that, but one of the things I was going to say is that I'm glad you brought that up and everything, and we do need to get ready to wrap up. But one of the things I was going to say is that, and I've mentioned this before, so it's not like me talking out of school, but I do work for a standardized testing company as well. And one of the things that I know from that standardized testing company is that there are biases that exist within the test. So if we're not going to deal with those biases or find a way to at least get address those biases, then we have a problem. And I would argue that across the country. So, if there are times that because, we are testing objectively, meaning that, I'm going to bring my bias into the testing field, just like the students are going to bring their bias into the testing as well. So definitely the biases we have to adjust to it.
Next time we're on air, we're going to talk about standardized testing and what alternative you might suggest. I'm just going to say, Sasha, the reason why the people at Mark Lee knows have such affection for Benjamin Franklin has nothing to do with chess or the fact he was a founding father. They just want more of him in their wallet. That's the only reason why they want it.
There's a couple of people that I would like more of in my wallet. I mean, I've listed a couple of folks in my wallet. I mean, I would like to see a couple of more of this gentleman in my wallet as well.
We can't say it.
Oh, it's a 50.
50. Try to think who's on the 50. Is it Thomas Jefferson?
No, I believe it might be Hamilton.
Alexander Hamilton.
Yeah.
It's from this Broadway show?
From the Broadway show? Yes, I don't think it's the same one. Good question. Google is a wonderful thing. So I'm gonna verify whose face that was that I was looking at and everything, because I'd hate to be given wrong information. I mean, we can definitely argue and everything along those lines. So before we get off and we see that lovely tape and everything that goes on, I'm going to find out and make sure that we're giving the correct answer, because I don't want to be saying that it's the wrong one. It was actually, see, I'm glad I corrected myself. It was actually Ulysses Grant, right? Yeah. Ulysses Grant. So Ulysses Grant is the one on the $50 bill and everything. So just so we know, make sure we're giving correct history and everything.
I was trying to picture the 50 in my head. I haven't yeah, I haven't seen one for a while. So,
Well, like I said, that was the first one I had seen in a while. Unfortunately, I did some work and some people paid me for doing it. So, like I said, they actually paid the old-fashioned way. They paid in cash, and they still owe me some more money. So I need to get off this so I can call them and be like, "Hey, y'all still owe me some more money." And by the way, Hamilton is on the $10 bill. So Hamilton is on the $10 bill. But on that note, we're gonna get on out of here. And this was a great discussion, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. And no, me and Shaquille and Sasha don't always agree, but we're always good friends and all of that. And we love having these heated discussions because actually Sasha's of the opinion that we need to have more of these heated discussions so that we can up our ratings and everything. Because Sasha has already told the big bosses that he's like, we need to yell at each other more because the ratings go up. Am I not right, Sasha?
Not necessarily to yell, although yelling sometimes helps. Some people enjoy yelling, so but not necessarily. We can have civilized discussions and
Exactly.
enjoy each
Civilized
other.
and heated discussions.
Yeah.
So on that note, I'm gonna play this video and get out of here. But I do appreciate both of y'all for being on, and hopefully Steve will be back on tomorrow. I know for a fact he'll be on Thursday because he's bringing us exciting guests because he's already got a guest that he's lined up. That's a special guest that is doing a fatherhood initiative. So we're gonna see what this fatherhood initiative person is talking about.
Tomorrow will be very important.
$2 bill, and I don't think I'm just googling it. He's on the $2 bill, and I can honestly tell you, I don't think I've ever even seen a $2 bill in America.
Who's
I've seen the
other $2 bill?
Thomas Jefferson, but I actually don't think I've ever seen a $2 bill. I've seen all the others, but I haven't seen a $2 bill.
Yeah,
you've seen the Susan B. Anthony as well?
Sorry?
You've seen the Susan B. Anthony as well?
What's the Susan B. Anthony?
She's got a bill as well. So Susan B. Anthony, I think it's a coin, but she's one of the few women. Well, now Harriet's got one, Harriet Tubman, but she's one of the few women that has a bill and everything.
Just out of the notes that are actually in circulation. I mean, I probably have seen it, but I just can't recall ever. The next time I come to America, I'm going to go hunting for a $2 note.
You'll have to pay premium.
Yeah, probably. It'll be $2.50.
Okay, I would like to say that tomorrow will be, for the first time, financial show, Modern Investing, which will be brought into 4 sections. 15-minute section, yeah. So it will be very interesting. The first one is dividend stocks. Then we are talking about gold and silver, Bitcoin, or what's happened there. Then we are going to talk of using options as a way to protect your investment. And finally, recent trades. So each of us who will be on the show will say something about recent trades, say last fixed trades, what he did, and why he entered the trade, and how he managed the trades, or so on. So it will be interesting discussion because we have a few people and everyone has different opinion, and it will be very interesting to try this approach.
I'm looking forward to it, and it should be fascinating because I've gone to a couple of business conferences, including some African American business conferences, that apparently the crypto coin is going to be the great savior of our economies, because that's what I've heard a couple of people talking about, including some folks that have got organizations in that space and everything. So I'm not quite buying that it's going to be the great savior of our economy, but I've been wrong about other things before, so I might be wrong about this. But I've heard a number of people talking about crypto coins as being the great leveling force, and I'm not quite buying it, but maybe you can teach me differently. And as I get ready to hit that video that I said I was going to hit a minute ago, I will just add to the fact of the Susan B. Anthony coin. It was a dollar that was out there minted from 1971 to 81 when production was suspended due to poor public acceptance, and then it was put back out there again apparently in 1999. So it was out there a couple of times, but it did not get a lot of acceptance, and it was supposed to be honoring one of the great activists in the women's rights movement and all of that. But apparently the rest of the public did not want to see that coin, so it didn't have much life. So on that note, let's check out this video.